As human beings living on planet Earth, we live in a big world with some 7.5 billion souls and countless species of life. Since I was a child, I was fascinated by the big questions, the existential ones, like who are we, where did we come from, where are we going? This fascination led me to become a mythologist. A few years ago, I received my PhD in mythological studies and depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute. This program basically anchored my passion for the existential quest in research and analysis, but it also led me to discover my own approach to an artistic and social practice I call Eco-Activism. This practice seeks to combat systems of oppression and violence that threaten multiple environments of our existence, including the human, natural, and cosmic worlds. What drew me to the field of mythology is the notion that myths are transformative. My focus has been contemporary myths of apocalypse, survival, and revolution. Today, myths of the new millennium are projected across digital media platforms and virtual spaces, from television and movies to gaming videos and the World Wide Web. Myths are vehicles of knowledge, memory, and the imagination, and they reflect the inner workings of what psychologist Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. For this reason, myths have the power to shift consciousness. They can catalyze revolution in the individual mind, and they can spark evolution across cultures, time, and space. In the same way we see art as a tool of social change, I believe mythology as a system of knowing and a framework of belief has the power to transform even more holistically, completely, and more importantly, sustainably. Some scholars of mythic theory claim that myths actually form the basis of reality and they give rise to the physical world. My favorite definition of myth comes from anthropologist and dancer Maya Deren, who said, "Myths are the facts of the mind manifest in a fiction of matter." And that definition alone inspires the imagination, right? On one hand, the thought of our creative agency and our power as a people to shape reality is very empowering. But then you turn on the evening news, you read the morning paper, and you scan your social media feed to find it's a much darker, different reality that we live in. Maybe like me, you can't help but wonder, what kind of world have we created? What's up with all this violence, darkness, and inhumanity? What kind of species are we becoming? Let's face it, as human beings living on planet Earth, we have a lot of things to worry about, right? Racial and social injustice, terrorism and nuclear war, limited food and contaminated water supplies, cyberbullies and Facebook killers, incurable cancers and superviruses, climate change and natural disaster, rogue asteroids and solar flares, you name it. Just reading off this list is exhausting, let alone the scary thoughts that it can conjure. It seems we encounter new threats on every level of our existence and in every environment that humans have come to inhabit. This brings me back to the title of my talk, Eco-Activism in the Age of the Multiverse. In the scientific community, an ecosystem is described as a community of living organisms and their environment. More generally outside of science and across multiple fields, an ecosystem can be described as a complex network or an interconnected system. So what's this multiverse all about? According to noted advocates of the multiverse theory, it is a newly revealed reality that includes an infinite number of parallel or alternate universes, some very similar and some very different from our own. For most of us, this sounds like the stuff that science fiction is made of, and it's very far from our daily experience on Earth here, in the here and now. So let's step back from this more scientific definition and look at the concept of the multiverse from a perspective we can all relate to. When you think about it, we already live and occupy many different worlds at the same time. The natural world, an awe-inspiring wild kingdom of elemental riches and resources. The digital and virtual worlds of our ever-advancing technology and new media. And the cosmic world of our native solar system and the greater galactic unknown. These worlds and environments have their own rules, dynamics, and change agents at work. In many ways, these worlds intersect and overlap, existing symbiotically, but they can also conflict and threaten one another and with even radical and sometimes catastrophic effects. I'm sure like me at some time or another, many of you have felt numb and defenseless against this multitude of dangers that plagues modern civilization and the planet that we call home. We are living in an age of unprecedented atrocities, apocalyptic disasters that have never before been witnessed in human history. And this presents a grave concern for all humanity, all life on Earth, that no conscious mind or compassionate heart can ignore. So then what do we do about it? How do we calm our fear and anxiety long enough to take action? What kind of weapons can everyday people use to fight back against these threats that permeate our every dimension of being? Let's zoom in on two worlds or ecosystems within that figurative multiverse and take a closer look at those threats and concerns. But don't worry, I'm not going to, tie your stomach up in knots or raise your blood pressure, because I know many of these doomsday programs often do, and I know you've seen them like, Armageddon Week or 100 Ways That the World Will Die. What I would like to do is leave you with a few strategies and tools of change that you can start using today and with no previous experience required. These methods have been tried and proven, effective by fellow activists and concerned citizens like you, people who are determined to conquer challenges and face fears, as well as cultivate hope in these daunting and very dangerous times. So consider this. If image shapes reality and we are what we eat, does the media we consume manifest our destiny? The average consumer of mainstream media encounters various forms of violent imagery on multiple platforms in a given day. In the same way we should care about the food that we put into our bodies, we should be critical consumers about the images that we feed our minds. Popular movies and video games graphically portray brutal combat and vicious assault, senseless destruction that viewers and users experience through celebrity actors and anonymous avatars. News media outlets tragically overlook the good to highlight the bad and the ugly stories of the day, while grossly misrepresenting minorities and the marginalized simply because this is what sells. Sound bites and video clips of terror and tragedy are played and replayed as we take in the trauma of it all over and over and over again. We're living in the time of the viral video, when murders and suicides are broadcast live to audiences of all ages, across a global network, straight with no filter. This is the dark side of the media universe. Scholars of media ecology like Marshall McLuhan and Bell Hooks have shown the impact of images and media on the individual and the collective psyche. Powerful connections can be made between recurring images and patterns in the media landscape and our cultural pathologies and perceptions of reality. It's not just the content of the media that has the power to inform our consciousness. The platforms and vehicles through which media is delivered also play a role in shaping the social environment in which we live and interact with one another. In a world of hyperconnectivity and ubiquitous violence, how do we fight off infectious fear-based media and the dark shadows it casts on our lives in the present, as well as in the unfolding future? Black science fiction luminary Samuel Delany says, "We need images of tomorrow to reimagine and reclaim our future." This is how we take control. We fight fire with fire, image with image. Direct action is not always about protesting in the streets. We can become do-it-yourself, DIY producers of our own media on our own terms. Start a podcast or a radio show. Shoot and share your own public service announcement. Make a short film about an issue that you're passionate about. Through independent media, we reclaim the human right to manifest our own destiny and self-determine who we are and what we want to be. By creating positive images of ourselves, our community, our world that the media rarely shows, we begin to shift narratives of negativity, opening doors to possibility and the potential for change. Right here in Cheltenham and across greater Philadelphia, this kind of activism is alive and hard at work. And you too can become a part of this creative resistance. This is where change begins. This is how we light up the darkness. But what happens when we've taken more from the planet than she can give or replace? What would happen if all people on Earth had free access to sustainable energy and didn't have to rely on coal or big oil to fuel our lives. Corporate greed and mass consumerism have put us in a pretty precarious predicament, wouldn't you agree? With recent decisions made by our current administration just days ago, it feels like we're actually moving backwards in this race to save the Earth. Nikola Tesla said, if your hate could be turned into electricity, it could light up the whole world. This was a man of true genius, and he was way ahead of his time. But you don't have to be a genius or a scientist to observe that the climate is changing. Winter feels like spring, and summer feels like fall. The ice caps are melting, and ocean shores are eroding. Perennial cycles, mating rituals, and seasonal migrations are out of sync as more species are being pushed to the brink of extinction. As the wealthy elite grow obese with power and overindulgence, people are dying of hunger across the globe. Just minutes from this high school, people suffer from malnutrition, diabetes, hypertension, living in food deserts that defy logic and disgrace humanity. These ills upon the earth and the structural violence upon our communities reflects a society sick with racial, food, and environmental injustice, economic disparity, and the immoral misuse of land by corporate initiative. Occupation and use of the lands in the commons is a human right of the people. It has belonged and still belongs to those who live and work upon the land, even if they don't know it's theirs to claim. So again, in the face of all these injustices, what do we do about it? We can take back the land by taking root where we stand. You can plant seeds where you live, in your backyard, community garden, or your local urban farm. Learn to grow your own healthy food free of toxic pesticides. Feed your family, share with your neighbors, contribute to your local creative economy. Urban farmers and independent growers everywhere are radically reclaiming the land of this earth and the resources it can provide. Like media activists and indie film producers, the urban farming community is using creative resistance as a tool of self-determination, returning hope and power to the people of overlooked and underserved communities. In this interconnected web of life, when one ecosystem is threatened, the entire multiverse or greater network is endangered. When life, territory, or beliefs are threatened, we fight back, and we fight back fiercely. We may even kill to defend what's ours. This is the power of natural law and the timeless survival instinct in action. With so many causes to fight and so many wounds to heal, sometimes we can lose sight of the big picture. Here on the ground, on the earthly plane, sometimes it can be hard to see that we're all connected. All people, all species of life, the mountains, the oceans, the trees, the air that we breathe, we all matter because we are all one. As founder and director of Myth Media Studios, I use image and myth to raise awareness of life-threatening issues that impact my community and the fate of the planet. My current project, Graffiti in the Grass, is funded in part by the Leeway Foundation and the Escape Artists Initiative. And it's an interactive graphic novel that promotes creative resistance and community readiness through an apocalyptic myth set in future Philadelphia. Now, this novel is interactive in the sense that it contains a real survival map that charts emergency routes and natural resources, sacred sites, and safe spaces in Philadelphia that can be accessed in the event of any number of the threats that I've touched on today. The title, Graffiti in the Grass, is actually a metaphor for crop circles. And if you don't know about crop circles, before I go, let me share just an image or two of this awe-inspiring phenomenon that really gives me hope. These masterful designs of sacred geometry and mythic symbolism seasonally appear in farming fields stretching across acres of cereal crops, and they've been popping up like clockwork for decades. Crop circles are mysteriously crafted by unknown entities, sometimes in a matter of milliseconds. Those who decipher and interpret these formations claim they offer warnings for humanity, guiding us toward a more peaceful and harmonious existence. Many believe this is just the work of pranksters or an elaborate hoax, but scientific evidence proves otherwise. This leads me to the last big question that I want to leave you with today, and I really want you to think about this one. But first, let me set up the scenario. What if NASA announced tomorrow that intelligent life exists on other planets, and scientists were somehow able to prove the existence of the multiverse. Then say there was some kind of evidence that benevolent ET from other worlds have been visiting Earth, trying to communicate and intervene in an effort to steer humanity away from not only the global destruction of Earth, but from the destruction of other worlds of the multiverse that our world is connected to. What would matter most to you in this new reality? What kind of human of the multiverse would you aspire to be? One of my goals as an eco-activist is to get others thinking about the big existential questions, the ones that transcend race, class, and gender, national borders, and religious beliefs. The true power of the mythic image is that it can speak volumes in a single vision and can tap into the wireless global network of the collective unconscious. This one right here, this image strikes a nerve deep inside when you see it. It stirs the soul of all humans who still have one. It's the mother of all issues, the fight of all fights. It's the final battlefield that eclipses all others. So do what you can, but do something. Do anything that brings yourself, and thus the world, closer to peace, light, and visions of hope for tomorrow. Because the multiverse depends on it, and there's no time to waste. Thank you.